They called her Deadweight the second she walked into that Coronado bar, some pencil pusher playing soldier, wasting oxygen in a room full of operators. What those 6 Navy SEALs didn't know was that Chief Warrant Officer Cale Donovan had spent 2 years running classified supply corridors through Helmand Province, that she'd once coordinated a direct action breach timeline for 96 hours straight while a Taliban cell hunted her convoy, and that her father had been a bare-knuckle boxer who taught her to end fights before they started. When the first SEAL shoved her shoulder and told her to find a different bar, she didn't leave. She stayed. And what happened next would make those operators question everything they thought they knew about who belongs in their world. Kyle. Donovan was 29 years old and standing at the bar of a dive joint 2 miles from the Coronado base gate on a Friday night in late September. The place smelled like stale beer and salt water, with cracked vinyl stools and a jukebox that hadn't been updated since the 90s. She wore jeans and a faded grey tee, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. No makeup, no pretense. She'd been a chief warrant officer in the Navy Supply Corps for 3 years, a former senior petty officer who'd been selected early for the CWO board. 7 years in uniform, 3 deployments deep, and she'd come to this bar because a friend from logistics school had invited her to meet some guys from his new unit. She didn't look like what most people expected when they heard the word veteran. She was 5'6", lean but not intimidating, with a quiet way of moving that didn't demand attention. Most people missed her entirely. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if stories like this one matter to you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Cale had grown up in Spokane, Washington, the daughter of a longshoreman and a high school algebra teacher. Her father, Vincent, had boxed semi-professionally in his 20s before a hand injury ended his career, and he'd taught Cale how to read body language, how to stay calm when someone crowded her space, and how to throw a punch that landed clean. Her mother had taught her patience and precision. By the time Cale enlisted at 22, she already knew how to stay composed under pressure. Cale had joined the Navy because she wanted structure and she wanted to serve, but she'd never planned on being in combat. Supply Corps seemed like a practical choice. Logistics, coordination, making sure the right equipment got to the right people at the right time. She was good at it. Better than good. She had a mind that could track a dozen variables at once, cross-reference data without notes, and spot a problem in a supply chain before anyone else even knew it existed. Her first deployment had been routine, managing inventory on a carrier strike group. Her second deployment was different. She'd been assigned to a forward operating base in Helmand Province, coordinating resupply convoys for special operations units operating deep in contested territory. That was where she learned what real pressure felt like. The deployments were 6 to 9 months each, with short dwell time between rotations. The kind of tempo that wore people down fast. One night in her second year overseas, her convoy had been ambushed 10 miles outside the wire. The lead vehicle hit an IED, and the Taliban cell that had been tracking them opened up from a ridgeline. Cale's truck had taken fire. The driver was hit in the shoulder, and she'd grabbed the wheel while rounds punched through the door panel inches from her leg. She keyed the convoy net, called for the escort gunners to lay suppressive fire, and drove hard toward the pre-briefed rally point, the alternate route they'd rehearsed during the mission brief. The convoy corpsman crawled forward to check the driver, while Kyle kept both hands on the wheel and her voice steady on the radio, coordinating with the quick reaction force and calling in the medevac grid. She brought 5 vehicles and 16 personnel back to base without losing anyone else. After that, the operators stopped seeing her as just a logistics officer. They started asking for her by name when they needed someone to coordinate high-risk movements. She'd earned her Navy Expeditionary Logistics Warfare pin and a reputation for staying calm when things went sideways. Her father had always told her that respect wasn't given. It was earned in moments when no one was watching, and the cost of failure was everything. She'd carried that with her through every convoy, every mission brief, every late night in a plywood operations center, trying to keep people alive with nothing but a radio and a map. The trouble started about 10 minutes after she walked into the E. Bardock Kyle had ordered a beer and was waiting near the back corner when a group of 6 men came in. They were SEALs, that much was obvious. tight shirts, confident posture, the kind of energy that filled a room whether they meant it to or not. One of them, a broad-shouldered guy with a blonde crew cut and a tattoo sleeve on his left arm, glanced at her and then looked away like she wasn't worth a second thought. Her friend from logistics school, their lieutenant named Rourke, waved her over to the table where the group had gathered. She walked up calm and even, and Rourke introduced her. Cale Donovan, he said. 3 deployments. Ran convoy operations in Helmand, one of the best coordinators he'd ever worked with. The blonde guy, whose name was Cade, gave her a once-over and smirked. He told Rourke that this wasn't a place for support staff, that they didn't need some supply officer hanging around while they tried to unwind. His tone wasn't loud, but it was dismissive, the kind of casual disrespect that assumed she'd just walk away. Another one of the SEALs, leaner and quieter, asked if she'd ever actually been outside the wire, or if she'd just pushed papers on a base somewhere safe. Cale didn't rise to it. She told him she'd run 73 resupply missions in 2 years, 16 of them in active contact, and that she'd coordinated support timelines for direct action units that never told her their names or their targets. She'd memorized breach sequences and exfil windows so the teams could move without worrying whether their logistics would hold. Cade laughed. He said that coordinating wasn't the same as doing, that sitting in a truck wasn't the same as kicking doors, and that if she wanted to hang out with operators, she should probably find a different bar. The rest of the group didn't say much, but they didn't stop him either. Rourke tried to smooth it over, but the damage was done. Cale could feel the weight of being judged for something that had nothing to do with her skills or her record. She'd been in this position before, being underestimated because she didn't fit the image people carried in their heads. Cale took a slow breath and set her beer down on the table. She didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing didn't change minds. Results did. But standing there in that bar, surrounded by men who thought she didn't belong, she felt the old familiar weight settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had during her first week at the FOB in Helmand, when a gunnery sergeant had told her to stay out of the way and let the real warfighters do their jobs. It was the same feeling she'd had after the ambush, when a staff sergeant had thanked her for driving them out of the kill zone, but still referred to her as the supply girl in his debrief. She thought about her father, about the hours they'd spent in the garage back in Spokane when she was a kid. He'd taught her how to wrap her hands, how to keep her guard up, how to move her feet and stay balanced. She remembered one afternoon when she was 15, sparring with him in the driveway, and he'd stopped her mid-combination to adjust her stance. He'd told her that the fight wasn't about being the biggest or the loudest, it was about being the one still standing when the noise stopped. She thought about the night of the ambush, the way her hands had stayed steady on the wheel, even when the rounds were coming through the door, the way she'd kept her voice calm on the radio, even though her driver was bleeding out next to her, and the corpsman was working fast to apply pressure and get a tourniquet on. She'd done that. She'd earned her place, but none of that mattered to the men at this table because they hadn't seen it. Cale looked at Cade and told him she wasn't going anywhere. Cade stood up. He was taller than her by a head, and he moved into her space the way men do when they think size alone will end the conversation. He told her again that she didn't belong here, that this was a place for people who'd actually been in the fight, and that she should walk out before she embarrassed herself. Kyle didn't move. She kept her weight centered, her hands loose at her sides and her eyes level with his. She told him that if he wanted her gone, he'd have to make it happen himself. The bar had gone quiet. Other patrons were watching now, some of them leaning back from their tables, sensing that something was about to break. One of the other SEALs, a guy with dark hair and a scar along his jawline, told Cade to let it go, but Cade wasn't listening. He reached out and put his hand on Kyle's shoulder, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to push her back a step. He told her she had one more chance to leave on her own. That was when everything changed. Kyle moved. She didn't shove him back or escalate with words. She dropped her shoulder, stepped inside his reach, and drove her elbow up into the space just below his sternum, a short, precise strike that folded him forward and emptied the air from his lungs. The sound of breath leaving him was sharp and sudden. Before he could recover, she swept his lead leg and put him on the floor, controlled and clean, the same way her father had taught her when she was 15 years old. His back hit the hardwood with a dull thud. The whole sequence took less than 3 seconds. Cade hit the ground hard, gasping, and the other SEALs were on their feet instantly. But Cale didn't press the attack. She stepped back, hands open, and told them she wasn't looking for a fight, she was looking for respect. The dark-haired SEAL with the scar moved between Cale and the rest of the group. His name was Garrett, and he was older than the others, probably mid-30s, with the kind of calm that came from years of experience. He looked down at Cade, who was still on the floor trying to get his breath back. And then he looked at Kyle. He asked her where she'd learned to move like that. Kyle told him her father had been a boxer, that he'd taught her footwork and timing before she'd ever enlisted, and that she'd used those skills to survive an ambush in Helmand when her convoy got hit and her driver went down. She told him she'd driven 5 vehicles through a Taliban kill zone with rounds coming through the door, that she'd coordinated the medevac and kept 16 people alive by staying calm and not freezing, and that she'd spent 4 days holding breach, timelines and exile windows in her head, because the operators she was supporting needed her to remember every detail so their missions wouldn't collapse. Garrett didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he reached down and helped Cade to his feet. He told the rest of the group that Kyle had just demonstrated something most of them forgot, that the fight wasn't about who talked the loudest or who looked the part. It was about who stayed composed when the pressure was on and who got the job done when everything else went sideways. Cade, still catching his breath, looked at Kyle with something closer to respect than she'd seen from him all night. He told her he'd been out of line. Garrett turned to Cale and told her that if she ever wanted to work with a team that actually valued competence over appearances, she should give him a call. He pulled out his phone and asked for her number, saying he'd put in a request for a temporary liaison detail if she was interested. No unit cards, no formal paperwork yet, just a quiet offer that acknowledged what she'd proven. The bar slowly went back to normal. People returned to their drinks, the jukebox started up again, and the tension drained out of the room. Kyle stayed for one more beer. Rourke apologized for the way things had gone, but she told him it wasn't his fault. The truth was she'd been through worse. She'd faced worse dismissals, worse assumptions, worse fights, but this one had ended differently. Over the next few weeks, Garrett reached out to her twice. The first time, he asked if she'd be willing to consult on a logistics problem his unit was running into with a resupply operation in a denied area. She walked him through a solution that cut their risk exposure in half. The second time, he invited her to observe a planning session for a direct action mission. She sat in the back of the room and said nothing. But when they hit a problem with their movement timeline, she offered a suggestion that tightened their window and gave them a better abort plan. By the end of the month, Garrett had submitted a request to have her assigned on temporary duty as a logistics liaison to his unit. It wasn't a combat role, but it was a role that put her skills where they mattered most. He'd quietly handled the paperwork from the bar incident through his chain of command, marking it down as self-defense with no formal action needed. The XO had signed off without escalation. Cale never went back to that bar in Coronado, but she didn't need to. She'd proven what she needed to prove, not by talking or posturing, but by staying calm and showing exactly who she was when it mattered. Her father had been right. Respect wasn't given. It was earned in moments when no one was watching, and the cost of failure was everything. She'd earned hers. One convoy, one mission, one quiet decision at a time, and the men who'd underestimated her that night in the bar would never make that mistake again.
I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you. Folded hands, your love, support, likes, comments, and subscriptions mean the world to me. Without you, this journey wouldn't be possible. Every view, every share, and every encouraging word keeps me motivated to create more content for you all. I'm truly grateful to have such an amazing community by my side. Let's keep growing together and making this journey even more special. Red Heart.